Now we want to look a little bit more closely at this relationship between a rhetorical writer and a rhetorical reader. So what's interesting, and what Plato observes, is that human beings, when we come up with ideas, when we think we see truth, there's no way for us to take that revelation and just beam it into someone else's head. We have to create language to transfer those ideas. The problem with language is that when I say a word, you don't always see or think exactly and precisely the thing I'm thinking. So if I say a word like chair, an image pops into your head. But it could be any image associated with that word chair. An office chair, a dining room chair. You may even have misheard what I said, and you could have thought of something completely different. Okay. This gets worse when the idea or the truth we're trying to communicate is more lofty or more significant. I say the word love, you could think of a million things, all the way from sort of romantic love to family love to even trivial love, the kind we feel towards things like food. But this problem just grows worse. The more complex our ideas, the more likely it is that our words fail to match those ideas. Okay? So, when a writer comes up with an idea, they must create something. We'll call this a text. Okay? If this text is fairly accurate to that idea, when a reader gets it, they will conceive of an idea that's pretty close. Notice that the light bulb shaped over the writer's head, the idea, is not exactly the same as the interpretation, the light bulb over the reader's head, but it's pretty close, and this has everything to do with how close that middle text is. Now what's really interesting is this. Those studying rhetoric also note that there's a role the reader plays. Even if that text in the middle is pretty close to the original idea, the reader still has some authority here, and it's this. If the reader misinterprets, they actually see the text as something different, something that it was not intended to look like. This changes what the reader sees and thinks, and ultimately this can affect what the original intention or purpose was in the first place. We see this all the time in political debates. You have one candidate say, 3 weeks ago you said this, and that's a horrible idea because of whatever. And then the first person has to defend themselves and say, that's not what I said. What I said was, and then they clarify. Okay? We also do this with each other anytime we're trying to win an argument. We interpret each other's words and we change the purpose behind them. So, when we study rhetoric and we talk about rhetoric, what we really are talking about is a way to control this situation. And this control can occur in 3 different places. It can come from the author's purpose, it can be embedded in the text itself, but it can also be affected by what the reader does with the text as well. In other words, the reader can control the situation just as well as anything else. We'll define this situation with these 3 terms, okay? The writer's intent, the writer's text, okay? And we'll see this as a separate thing. And then the significance of all this. What's important to note is that all writing exists in this situation, and all writing is influenced by each of these 3 elements equally. All writing has a purpose behind it. All writing has an audience to it, and all writing ultimately has to take a form. That's true even of a grocery list. If you're writing it, because you're writing it to remember it, that's its purpose. It has a specific form. You wouldn't write a grocery list in a paragraph because it's hard to find the items. And then you ultimately are the audience to that list. So part of becoming a strong writer is understanding this situation and being able to define it for any writing you are either composing or even reading. These 3 elements, not just the writer, all participate in a kind of struggle for authority over what something means. The writer may have intended a certain specific meaning, and they may have even designed it to communicate that meaning, but the audience has an authority and can change that meaning in interesting ways. So we want to look for this as we keep going. If you ever get stuck while reading something, there are some questions that you can consider. And the first one is simply, what is the situation of this text? When was it written? What's the original audience for this text? What's the form of this text? Is it mostly logic? Is it kind of an essay? Is it a story? Why is that interesting? And then who is the writer? Where is this person writing from? To what political event or social situation is this writer writing to? Okay. And after you define the situation, take a step back and ask yourself, what do you feel is most influencing the meaning? Is it the writer? Is this a very famous, well-respected person, and we are very likely to just believe what they are saying? Is it the form or the style of the writing? Is this a different way to express ideas, say as a comic book or a poem? And is it the form itself that's most influencing the meaning? Or is it the audience? Is this something that was written and kind of given over to the audience to let the audience play with it? Okay, so just asking that question and exploring how one side of this triangle is most influential over the meaning will give you interesting observations and questions to follow up with. Ultimately, this is what you really want to get out of studying the rhetorical situation, is how, as a writer, can you control this? What is your purpose? What is the best form of writing to communicate this purpose based on who the audience is and how you want to reach this audience?